Aquarius. There are days that pass like noise, and then there are days that arrive quietly, but leave you unable to return to who you were before. Today is not dramatic. Nothing breaks, nothing collapses, and yet, something inside you knows. This version of your life no longer fits the shape of who you're becoming. You may not feel sad. You may not feel excited. Just a subtle sense that the air feels different. Your thoughts move slower, and the world you once understood so well now feels slightly out of focus. If you've been successful, stable, and still quietly wondering, why doesn't this feel like enough anymore? This message is already about you. If you feel that quiet shift too, type "I feel it" in the comments. Not for me, but for yourself. Because in the next few moments, we're not talking about change in your life. We're talking about the moment you realized you already changed. Aquarius, I want you to imagine this moment the way it really happens. Not like a movie, not like a breakthrough. Just a small, almost invisible pause inside your body. You wake up and nothing is wrong. The light looks the same. Your phone is still where you left it. The world hasn't changed its tone. And yet, something in you has already shifted its weight. It's not sadness. It's not joy. It's closer to that feeling you get when a room you've known for years suddenly feels slightly rearranged, even though no furniture moved. Your breath goes a little deeper without you trying. Not dramatic, just slower. As if your lungs decided to stop rushing before your mind did. You notice sounds more than usual. The hum of the fridge, the distant traffic, a voice on the radio that suddenly feels too loud or too fast. Things that were background noise yesterday now feel like they're standing closer to you. And this is the part no one talks about. The body always knows first. Long before logic writes a story. Long before you give it a reason. Long before you admit anything out loud. When you're younger, change comes like an announcement. A breakup, a job offer, a crisis, something external that forces you to react. But when you've lived long enough, real change arrives like a whisper in your chest. A subtle sense that your internal rhythm no longer matches the tempo of the life you're living. You don't feel lost. You just feel slightly misaligned. Like a compass that still works, but is quietly pointing somewhere new. For Aquarius, this is especially delicate. Because you've spent years being the one who adapts. The one who understands systems, people, patterns, possibilities. You learned how to move ahead of emotion, how to stay rational when others get overwhelmed. But this signal doesn't come from your thoughts. It doesn't speak in sentences. It lives in your breathing. In the way your shoulders drop for no reason. In the way you stare at familiar things and feel a gentle distance you can't explain. It's as if your nervous system is saying, "We've outgrown this frequency." Not because it's wrong, not because it failed, just because you're not the same receiver anymore. And that can feel strangely neutral. No crisis, no urgency. Just a quiet knowing that the old motivation doesn't pull you like it used to. The same goals feel lighter. The same routines feel thinner. The same conversations don't land where they once did. Here's the truth most people over 35 eventually discover. The most important transitions in life don't arrive as events. They arrive as sensations. A pressure behind the ribs, a softness in the chest, a tiredness that isn't physical, a curiosity that doesn't have a subject yet. This is the day awareness starts leading instead of schedules, not in a dramatic way, but in the way a tide shifts direction while the surface still looks calm. So let me ask you something gently. When was the last time you trusted a feeling before you understood it? Because this signal isn't asking you to change anything yet. It's only asking you to notice, to stay present with the sensation without rushing to label it. This is the moment before insight, before decisions, before new stories form. Just you, your breath, and that quiet sense that life is about to feel different. Not because something happened, but because something inside you finally woke up. Aquarius. There's a strange kind of calm that comes after the signal. Not relief, not clarity. Just a soft awareness that stays with you through the day, like a quiet companion walking a few steps behind your thoughts. You go back into your life the way you always do. The same calendar, the same responsibilities, the same people who know your stories by heart. Everything still works. Nothing is falling apart. And that's exactly what makes it unsettling. Because you start noticing yourself from the inside. The way you answer questions more slowly. The way certain conversations feel finished before they even begin. The way achievements that once felt heavy with meaning now sit lightly in your hands, as if they belong to someone you used to be. You don't feel ungrateful. You just feel complete in a way that doesn't excite you anymore. Like finishing a book you loved, then realizing you're not sure what chapter comes next. For most people, success is supposed to be the destination. Stability, recognition, comfort. The idea that one day you finally arrive and rest. But for you, something different happens. You arrive and discover you've already changed on the way there. It's subtle. You still show up. You still perform. You still smile in the right places. But inside, the old hunger doesn't speak as loudly. The dreams that once kept you awake at night now feel like memories you respect, but no longer need to chase. And this isn't a crisis. It's not burnout. It's not dissatisfaction. It's more like standing in clothes that still fit your body but no longer fit your spirit. You realize the job is fine. The relationship is real. The routine is functional. Yet there's a quiet truth forming underneath it all. You are no longer the person who built this life. You're not broken. You're not lost. You've simply outgrown the internal shape that once matched everything around you. And that's a very different kind of discomfort. Because nothing external gives you permission to change. No dramatic event forces your hand. No visible reason explains what you're feeling. So you carry it silently. This private awareness that you're standing in a life that still belongs to you, but no longer defines you. For Aquarius, this is especially powerful. You're wired to evolve through understanding, through perspective, through internal shifts that others may never notice. You don't need destruction to grow. You grow through quiet realizations, through small internal upgrades that rewrite who you are before the world even realizes an update happened. And here's the part that takes courage. Admitting that you've outgrown something doesn't mean it failed. It means it succeeded at making you bigger. The life you built did its job. It taught you what you needed to know. It carried you through the version of yourself that was necessary at the time. Now there's a new version standing quietly behind your eyes. Not demanding, not impatient. Just waiting for you to notice that your inner world has more space than it used to. So let me ask you this, gently. If nothing in your life had to change right now, who would you allow yourself to become anyway? Because this feeling isn't asking you to leave. It's asking you to listen. To acknowledge that growth doesn't always come with movement. Sometimes it arrives as a silent mismatch between who you are and what once felt like enough. And that's not the end of your story. That's the moment the next one quietly becomes possible. Aquarius. After you begin to sense that you have outgrown something, there is often a second realization that arrives quietly, almost heavier than the first. It is the awareness that your strength has become a role, not just a quality, a position you unconsciously occupy in every room you enter. People lean on you without asking. They bring you problems without realizing it. They relax around you because you make things feel stable, not perfect, just held, and you rarely question it because it feels natural. You have always been the one who can see the whole picture, who understands both sides, who absorbs tension and turns it into calm. But lately, something shifts inside you. You start noticing how often you are the emotional anchor, how often your own feelings are placed on pause so that others can feel safe. You do not just manage tasks, you manage atmospheres. You read the energy of a room before anyone speaks. You adjust your tone, your words, your reactions. Not because you are afraid, but because you care. And that is the invisible weight, not the work itself, but the constant internal regulation, the quiet decision to stay composed even when you are tired, even when you need space, even when you are unsure yourself. At this stage of life, you have likely become a reference point, the person people call when things fall apart, the one who keeps the structure intact, the one who rarely gets to say, "I am not okay today." There is no drama in this, no breakdown, just a soft exhaustion that feels emotional rather than physical. You begin to notice it in small moments, when someone vents and you automatically listen, when a conflict appears and all eyes turn toward you, when you are the one expected to stay reasonable so everyone else can be human. And for the first time, a gentle question forms. Who holds me when I am the one holding everything else? This is not resentment, it is recognition. You are not tired of helping. You are tired of being the emotional infrastructure. There is a difference. You realize that you have been carrying not only your own life, but the emotional climate of your environment. You have been translating chaos into coherence, turning stress into clarity, soothing others before allowing yourself to feel anything fully. And because you do it well, no one notices the cost. But your body knows. Your nervous system knows. There is a kind of fatigue that comes from always being the stable one, the one who cannot afford to fall apart, because too many people are leaning. Here is the quiet truth that emerges. You are not exhausted because life is hard. You are exhausted because you have been emotionally responsible for more than one nervous system. And that is not something you were taught to measure. It does not appear on resumes. It does not get rewarded with titles. But it shapes your inner world more than you realize. So let me ask you something softly. If you stopped being the calmest person in the room, would the room still know how to breathe? This is where a new layer of awareness opens. Not about quitting your role, but about redefining your right to be held too. Aquarius, you are allowed to be supported without managing the outcome. You are allowed to feel without translating it for others. You are allowed to exist without stabilizing the emotional field. Your strength does not disappear when you rest. It becomes more honest. And maybe this day is not asking you to do less, but to carry less that was never yours to begin with. Not dramatically, not publicly, just internally. A subtle shift. From being the system that keeps everything running, to being a person who is finally included in their own circle of care. That is not weakness. That is evolution. And once you feel that difference, you cannot unfeel it. Because the strongest people do not break. They learn where to place the weight down, and when you finally begin to place some of that weight down, something else becomes visible. Not outside of you, but in the quiet space where you usually ignore your own reflection. It is the moment you start noticing how your value is measured. Not in words people say, but in the way they move around you. How often your presence is treated like a function. Something useful, something reliable, something that keeps things smooth. You begin to see the pattern. People reach out when they need clarity, when they need support, when they need someone who will not make the situation heavier, and you show up, as you always have. But one day, something subtle happens. Someone makes a decision without asking you. Someone speaks for you in a room you helped build. Or you imagine disappearing for a week and realize the system would still operate just fine. Not better, not worse. Just fine. And that is where the question lands. Not with anger, not with sadness, but with a strange, gentle ache. Am I valued for who I am, or for how well I serve the structure? It is a quiet realization, Aquarius. The kind that does not demand immediate answers. It simply rearranges the way you see yourself inside your own life. You start noticing how often you are praised for being efficient, for being low maintenance, for being easy to rely on, but rarely for being deeply seen. You are appreciated for what you provide, not always for what you feel. And because you are capable, intelligent, emotionally fluent, you adapt. You minimize. You become the version of yourself that fits the environment. Not because you are losing yourself, but because you learned that being useful is safer than being fully present. Here is the hidden truth most people do not talk about. Self-worth slowly shifts from being internal to being negotiated. You begin to feel valuable when you are needed, relevant when you are consulted, visible when you are performing, and invisible when you are simply being. This is not your fault. It is the natural consequence of living in a world that rewards contribution more than existence. But at some point, your nervous system notices the difference. It notices that your worth feels conditional, that your sense of identity rises and falls with how essential you are to others. And that is exhausting in a way that is hard to name. So you pause, not externally, internally, and you ask yourself something very quietly. If I were no longer needed, would I still feel allowed to exist? This is not a dramatic crisis. It is a recalibration. You are not trying to become more. You are trying to become real again. You begin to sense that your value cannot be based on usefulness alone. Because usefulness is replaceable. Presence is not. Efficiency can be replicated. Your inner world cannot. And maybe that is what this moment is teaching you. That you are allowed to matter even when you are not producing, not fixing, not optimizing. That your worth is not something others grant you through attention or reliance. It is something you remember when you stop negotiating your existence. So let me ask you this gently. If no one needed anything from you today, how would you relate to yourself? This is not about withdrawing from the world. It is about returning to yourself inside it. Not as a role, not as a system, not as a function, but as a person who does not need to justify their presence to earn their place. And when that realization settles in, something shifts again. Not outwardly, not visibly, but in the way you occupy your own life. Less pressure to perform, less need to prove, more space to simply be here. Not impressive, not essential, just real. And for the first time in a long while, that feels like enough. And as your sense of self becomes quieter and more honest, your relationship with money begins to change too. Not in numbers, not in goals, but in how your body reacts when you think about rest. There is a moment when you realize that you are not chasing more anymore. You are chasing space, room to breathe, room to pause without calculating the consequences. You look at your life and it seems stable on the surface. Bills are paid, plans exist, nothing is collapsing. And yet, there is a subtle tension inside you. A feeling that even your comfort has conditions, that your sense of safety is still connected to effort, to productivity, to staying ahead of something unnamed. You notice it in the way you struggle to fully relax, even on days off, even on vacations, even in moments that are supposed to feel free. Your mind stays alert, on scanning, optimizing, as if rest itself needs to be earned. And slowly, a deeper truth appears. You are not afraid of being poor. You are afraid of losing control, of becoming dependent, of needing more than you can provide for yourself. So you keep moving, not out of greed, but out of a long-learned instinct to survive. At this stage of life, that instinct becomes quieter, but it does not disappear. It simply disguises itself as ambition, as responsibility, as being practical. And one day, you catch yourself thinking something unexpected. I do not need more money. I need permission to stop proving that I deserve what I already have. That realization feels strange, almost disorienting, because you were taught that freedom comes from accumulation, from building, from always preparing for the next thing. But your nervous system tells a different story. It does not crave excess. It craves relief, not luxury, not status, just the ability to exhale without guilt. You begin to see how deeply survival mode has shaped you, how it taught you to stay vigilant even in safe spaces, how it made you measure your worth through output, how it blurred the line between being secure and being constantly on guard. And this is where your definition of wealth shifts, not as an idea, but as a felt experience. Wealth becomes the ability to rest without anxiety, to make choices without fear, to say no without panic, to pause without feeling like something will fall apart. It is not about having more. It is about not being trapped by the need for more. You notice that the most expensive thing in your life is not your home, not your car, not your lifestyle. It is your tension, the constant internal pressure to stay prepared, to stay useful, to stay ahead of uncertainty. And when you imagine a truly rich version of yourself, it is not someone with endless resources. It is someone who feels internally safe, someone who can stop working and still feel worthy, someone who can slow down and still feel secure, someone who trusts that their existence is not a liability. So let me ask you something, quietly. If you no longer had to protect yourself from the future, what kind of life would you build today? This is not about quitting your ambitions. It is about freeing them from fear. Because fear builds systems that keep you busy. Freedom builds systems that keep you alive. And maybe this is what this moment is really offering you. Not a new financial plan. Not a radical change. Just a different relationship with safety. One where money is no longer the thing that allows you to breathe, but simply one of many tools that supports your life. Where your nervous system finally understands that you are no longer in danger. That you do not have to run. That you do not have to justify your rest. And in that space, something remarkable happens. You stop surviving your life, and you start inhabiting it. Not urgently, not defensively, but gently. as someone who no longer needs to prove that they deserve to feel okay. Because the deepest form of wealth is not what you accumulate. It is what you no longer have to carry. And when you finally begin to feel lighter inside yourself, when survival is no longer the main rhythm of your life, something else quietly comes into focus. Your relationships. Not the dramatic ones, not the painful ones, but the gentle, ordinary connections that have simply stopped feeling alive. You still talk. You still show up. You still exchange updates, jokes, memories. Nothing is wrong. And yet, something is missing. There is a softness in the silence now, a distance that is not hostile, just empty. You notice it in the way conversations feel thinner, how you listen more than you share, how you edit yourself without realizing it, how parts of you stay unspoken, not because they are unsafe, but because they no longer seem relevant to the space. And this is where it becomes confusing, because no one hurt you, so no one betrayed you, no one crossed a line. These people are kind, familiar, stable, but you feel invisible in their presence, not ignored, just unseen. It is as if you have changed your internal frequency, and the old signal no longer reaches the same places. You sit across from someone you have known for years, and realize you are no longer curious about being understood by them. Not because you do not care, but because you already know they cannot meet you where you are now. You are not hiding. You are just not resonating, and that difference matters. At this stage of life, relationships do not end loudly. They fade quietly. They become polite, predictable, comfortable in a way that feels emotionally distant. You do not argue. You do not explain. You simply stop offering your inner world. Not as punishment. Not as withdrawal. Just as a natural response to being in spaces that no longer reflect who you are becoming. You begin to sense that connection is not about history. It is about presence. Not how long you have known someone, but how real you feel around them. And maybe the most painful truth is this: you can love people and still outgrow the version of yourself that existed in their world. That does not make anyone wrong. It just means growth is not symmetrical. You are evolving inwardly. Your questions are deeper, your values quieter, your boundaries softer but firmer. And some relationships were built on a version of you that no longer exists. So you sit with the discomfort of this realization, the strange grief of losing something without losing anyone. There is no closure, no conflict, no clear ending, just a sense that the emotional door is no longer where you left it. And here is the part no one prepares you for. Outgrowing relationships can feel lonelier than ending them, because nothing justifies your sadness. There is no story to tell. No reason to explain. You simply wake up one day and realize that you are not fully yourself around people who once felt like home. So let me ask you something, gently. When was the last time you felt deeply seen without having to translate yourself? This is not about abandoning anyone. It is about honoring your internal shift. You are not becoming colder. You are becoming clearer. And clarity changes the shape of connection. You begin to crave fewer relationships, but deeper ones. Spaces where you do not have to perform your stability, where you do not have to simplify your thoughts, where you do not have to shrink your questions. You want to be met, not managed, heard, not tolerated, recognized, not accommodated. And maybe this is the quiet invitation of this phase, to stop forcing alignment where resonance no longer exists. Not with bitterness, not with distance, but with honesty. Because real connection is not about staying. It is about being able to arrive as the person you are now. And if some doors no longer open that way, it does not mean you failed. It means you changed. And sometimes, growth does not ask you to walk away. It simply asks you to stop pretending you still fit in rooms that no longer reflect your light. Not every relationship ends in conflict. Some end in silence. And that silence is not empty. It is space. Space for the kind of connection that will finally see you without needing you to explain who you have become. And as the circle around you grows quieter, as certain connections gently dissolve into space, you begin to notice something even deeper. Not in other people, in yourself. It is the moment you realize that the life you built to feel safe now feels strangely tight. Not painful, just restrictive in a way you cannot ignore anymore. You start sensing how carefully you move through your own days, how often you choose the predictable response, the reasonable answer, the version of yourself that keeps everything calm. Not because you are afraid of failing, but because you are afraid of disrupting the image of being grounded, of being reliable, of being the one who does not cause waves. You have become very good at being okay, at staying composed, at carrying responsibility without complaint. And for a long time, that felt like strength. But now, it feels like containment. You notice how often you pause before speaking, how many thoughts you soften before sharing, how many desires you delay because they feel inconvenient to the life you already created. Not because they are unrealistic, but because they would change the narrative. And change feels dangerous, not to your success, but to the version of you that everyone expects. You are not afraid of starting over. You are afraid of being seen starting over, afraid of disappointing the people who believe you are settled, afraid of confusing those who see you as stable, afraid of disrupting the identity you worked so hard to maintain. So you stay still, not externally, internally. You live inside the familiar, the known, the acceptable. And slowly, you begin to realize that safety has a shadow side. It protects you from chaos, but it also protects you from growth. It keeps you comfortable, but it also keeps you small. Not small in potential, small in expression. You are safe enough to survive, but not free enough to expand. And that is the quiet tension you feel. The subtle pressure between who you are and who you allow yourself to be. Here is the truth that emerges when you sit with it honestly. Your life is not wrong. It is simply no longer wide enough. You have outgrown the emotional container you built. The routines, the roles, the expectations, they once held you. Now they hold you back. And this is where it becomes difficult, Aquarius, because the cage is invisible. There are no bars, no locks, no obvious walls, just habits, just identities, just a version of yourself that learned to stay safe instead of staying true. So let me ask you something, quietly. If no one expected you to remain the same, what part of yourself would you finally let speak? Not dramatically, not recklessly, just honestly. There is a version of you that is more curious, more expressive, more alive. But that version requires uncertainty, requires vulnerability, requires letting go of being perceived as stable. And that feels risky in a world that rewards consistency. Yet deep down, you know this. You are not stuck because you lack options. You are stuck because you are protecting an identity that no longer feels like home. Safety used to be your refuge. Now it is your ceiling. It limits how loudly you laugh, how deeply you question, how boldly you imagine your future. It asks you to stay recognizable, even when your inner world is transforming. And the most painful realization is not that you are trapped. It is that you built the walls yourself, out of good intentions, out of responsibility, out of care, out of the desire to not disrupt the world around you. But your soul does not want to be contained by your own caution. It wants room. It wants honesty. It wants to breathe without negotiating every impulse. So maybe this moment is not about breaking free, not about radical change, not about burning anything down. It is about noticing where you have mistaken safety for truth, and gently asking yourself whether staying comfortable is still worth the cost of staying quiet. Because the life that feels safest is not always the life that feels most real. And at some point, you have to choose. Not between stability and chaos, but between existing carefully and living honestly. It does not arrive with thunder. No dramatic music. No one else notices the moment it begins. It feels more like a quiet breath you take without thinking. The kind that happens when you finally stop holding your chest tight. You realize something subtle has shifted. Not in the world, in you. For so long, you thought change had to be loud to be real, that it had to look like burning bridges, bold announcements, or a clean break from the past. But what is happening now feels different, softer, almost invisible. And yet, it is irreversible. Because this version of you is not trying to impress anyone anymore, not trying to prove that you are strong, or special, or unshakable. You are simply allowing yourself to exist without performing. There is a strange peace in that. A peace that does not feel exciting at first. Just honest. You start telling the truth in small ways. Not the kind that shocks people. The kind that frees your body. You say no without a story attached. You rest without guilt. You leave conversations before you feel drained. No one applauds. No one notices the difference but you. But inside, something ancient exhales, like a nervous system that has been waiting years for permission to stand down. Aquarius, you were never meant to become a different person. You were meant to stop betraying the one you already are. This new self does not rush, does not chase, does not need to be seen. It chooses presence over potential, peace over possibility, alignment over ambition. And that might be the bravest thing you have ever done, because the old you survived by staying alert, reading the room, being useful, being stable. This version survives by being real. There is a tenderness in that shift, almost fragile, but it carries a quiet power that cannot be undone. Once you taste what it feels like to live without pretending, you cannot go back to performing your own life. Even if the world stays the same, you do not meet it the same way anymore. You show up slower. You listen deeper. You respond instead of react. Not because you are healed, but because you are finally willing to stay with yourself. And that changes everything. Not externally, internally. The way you breathe in a room. The way your shoulders soften when you wake up. The way your thoughts no longer feel like a courtroom. This is not a transformation others will recognize, but it is one your soul has been preparing for a long time. Let me ask you something gently. When was the last time you felt truly present in your own life, without trying to improve it? Because that is where the new self lives, not in becoming more, but in being here, fully, quietly, without apology. These 24 hours do not rewrite your destiny. They do not fix your past. They do not solve the world. They simply shift the way you stand inside your own existence. And sometimes, that is the only revolution that actually lasts. And maybe the most surprising part of all is that nothing outside you had to change first. The world is still loud. People still expect things. Time still moves at the same speed. But you do not meet it the same way anymore. You are no longer waiting for permission to be yourself. You are no longer negotiating your truth with fear. You are no longer asking life to prove it is safe before you live it. You are here, breathing, present, and that is enough to begin again. Aquarius, this is what awakening often looks like. Not fireworks, not instant miracles, but a quiet return to your own center. A soft remembering of who you were before the world taught you to edit yourself. If this message found you tonight, it is not random. It is resonance. Something in you was ready to hear it. Something in you already knows the next step. And it does not have to be big, just honest, just yours. So before you go, leave a small sign of your presence here. A word, a feeling, a simple yes in the comments. Not for the algorithm, for yourself. And if this space feels safe to you, if this voice feels like it understands you, stay with us. Subscribe. Come back. Because this channel is not about predictions. It is about remembering. And the journey does not end with this message. It is only opening. There is another layer coming, another truth, another moment that will meet you exactly where you are. Until then, trust what you feel. Move gently. Speak honestly. And let the future unfold, not from fear, but from the quiet strength of finally being at home in yourself.